Apple and Samsung hate each other, but they also need each other in a real way. So I was looking at this random YouTube short the other day. It was comparing like the S25 Ultra to the iPhone 16 Pro, and one of the top comments reminded me, most people don't actually realize that Samsung makes the displays for the iPhone. So yeah, Samsung, who has their own line of smartphones with high-end OLED displays, makes the high-end OLED displays of their rival, the iPhone. And this is at the top of my list of fascinating company relationships where the economics more than outweigh the public rivalry. Now, the high-end OLED iPhones typically have several suppliers. You know, sometimes LG chips in a little bit, sometimes some others, but it's mostly Samsung because they're the one display company that can reliably supply these high-quality screens at a massive scale with the quality that's up to Apple standards for the iPhone. Now, it's funny, if you were hearing this for the first time and you were thinking, if you were Samsung and Apple came up to you and they're like, hey, we're back, we want to buy 100 million new OLEDs for our brand new iPhone Air, whatever, and it's got to have this amazing high brightness and perfect color calibration. If you were Samsung, what if you just said, no, yeah, we won't sell you the screens? Then suddenly Apple has a supply chain crisis on their hands and they have to use worse quality displays, and suddenly Samsung screens are way better, so everyone buys Samsung phones, and then Samsung wins, right? But it's not that simple. And it's really entirely just because of the economics. Samsung makes so much money selling displays, millions and millions of screens to Apple for the iPhone. And so the theoretical amount more Samsung phones they could sell if they like sabotage the iPhone displays would just not nearly make up for the amount of money they lose if they don't have Apple as a customer anymore. Fun fact, Samsung came out with the Galaxy S8 in 2017. But you know what they made even more money from than the Galaxy S8? The iPhone X. Because they sold so many hundreds of millions of iPhone X displays to Apple that it actually made them more money as a company. Apple needed roughly 180 to 200 million OLED panels for the iPhone X. So of course they keep doing it, despite being competitors for the exact same customer. This dynamic has been real for a number of years now, but there are rumors it may eventually come to an end if Apple were to, say, switch to micro LED displays for a new iPhone and have to find a new supplier. That could be tough for Samsung. Kind of the same way that when Apple switched to their own design chips for Macs and stopped using off-the-shelf Intel chips, that was tough for Intel. But for now, money talks. But here's another partnership that has surprised some people. Apple and Google. And this is one that's been in the news a bit lately because the power of defaults is very, very powerful in the tech world. Like, most average people don't really change their default. They don't even know how to change the default. So on a super popular mass market product like the iPhone, any third-party services that get chosen as a default automatically inherit millions of users. And they kind of set the tone for that experience for all those people. It's very powerful. Think about ChatGPT being plugged into Apple Intelligence, or even back in the day when YouTube was an included app on that iPod Touch and the old iPhone. Remember that? Am I getting old? Anyway, you know how when you open up Safari on the iPhone, you got that bar at the bottom that says search or enter website? And so if you start typing a search query, Google search suggestions automatically start popping up. And then you hit go and it takes you to a Google search page. That's some pretty powerful real estate for Google. That could have theoretically been a Bing or Yahoo search. It turns out Google has been paying Apple $20 billion every year to stay the default search engine in Safari on the iPhone. Just for that, $20 billion. And because it's one of the most popular phones in the world, and there's millions and millions of searches going through, all of those searches are now Google searches because they paid to be the default. And that's a partnership both companies have been willingly participating in for years because it's a no-brainer for both of them. For Apple, well, I mean, that's a pretty easy one. You just get a free $20 billion every year to keep it the way it is. People expect Google search. Great. For Google, well, that helps them secure their spot as number one by not allowing others to be the default there, and people aren't really changing the defaults very often. So that's millions and millions of searches for them. But this could all soon be getting thrown away. Because in the US Justice Department's trial against Google, they've argued that, this is anti-competitive behavior. This is monopolistic behavior. Apple and Google's net profits last year were both around $100 billion, which is, ridiculously huge numbers. But think about that. $20 billion of that just came right off the top for Google and added right to the bottom line for Apple, just to be the default for search in Safari. Those are huge percentages. Now, both companies in court are, downplaying how big of a deal this is, and I think both would happily keep these agreements in place since it's such a win-win. I think about this a lot. What if they just stopped? What if that payment stopped? And I think there are basically three distinct things that could happen here. One, which I think is the most likely, is nothing changes, like they just continue to have Google as the default search anyway, and it's fine, because when you go to search something in Safari, you probably meant to Google it. I think it would be kind of weird if it suddenly was Bing or Yahoo search every time. I guess technically they could immediately change it. Okay, the money's gone. Google's not paying to be the default anymore. Maybe it could jump straight to like ChatGPT or something like that. They have been working with OpenAI. Maybe that becomes an expanded part of their partnership, although then maybe again, it's kind of illegal. But three, and maybe this is the most interesting one, there's a contingent of people who believe that Apple could deploy their own search product in place of Google's, their own Apple search engine. And enough of those people work for Google that's actually the reason why Google struck this deal in the first place, is because they believed that Apple making their own search engine would be such a big threat to Google that they needed to do this. So they called it a code red. They saw that searches from Apple devices at the time accounted for over half of Google's search business, and they couldn't afford to lose that. If Apple made their own search product, they could take half of their business. But yeah, obviously this is still developing, but it is fascinating that Google search actually has decently real competition now. I know I've been using ChatGPT a lot lately, and I've been talking a lot also on the Waveform podcast about how I've been using Gemini on my phone a lot lately and getting real value out of it. So for knowledge searches and for things that are a little bit more in depth, yeah, I do that over a Google search kind of every single time. But for now, yeah, money still talks. So then one more that's been fascinating me a lot recently, Google and Samsung. So Samsung makes smartphones, obviously, like we've talked about, Samsung Galaxies. Google also makes their own smartphones, the Pixel lineup of phones. Now, besides the already obvious fact that the Samsung phones run Android, which is made by Google, there's also this really weird trend lately. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'll be watching a Google event and they'll be demonstrating a new Android feature, but they'll use a Samsung device instead of their own Pixel devices. Have you seen this? I always figured as long as Google has their own devices, surely they'd use them at every opportunity for all their own events. It's perfect promo. And yet, here they are, 9 minutes into the 2024 Made by Google event, and they're doing a demo of a new Gemini conversational feature on a Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. This is 15 minutes before unveiling their own new Pixel phone on the same stage in that event. Just earlier this week on a pre-IO live stream, they did it again. 10 minutes in, they start a Gemini live chat demo, and they do the whole thing on a Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, and they called it out by name and everything. And that's before waiting until the end of the event to do a little product showcase talking about how many other Android phones are awesome that exist, including their own Pixel 9a. What gives? What are they doing? So this one's a little less cut and dry than just one of them is paying the other, therefore you see the appearance, but in a very real way, again, they need each other. They're very intertwined. So we'll see this all the time. New Android features will debut on Samsung phones right alongside Pixel phones. Remember Circle to Search? The debut of that feature was on the Samsung Galaxy S24 at the exact same time as Google's own Pixel 8. And Google also announced Wear OS 3 with a Samsung partnership. There are often little features that get announced from Google that start with a little window of exclusivity on a Samsung phone, or even sometimes it's Samsung that announces them. So it's very clear that they have some sort of working partnership. And so I think Samsung needs Google because, obviously Google Android, it's the spine, it's the backbone of what they're building off of. It's the Play Store, it's the Google services. They've built a very powerful money-making product around a Google core. But Google needs Samsung because Samsung smartphones are the representation of Android phones for way, way more people. In North America alone, Samsung has something like 5 times the market share of Pixel phones. Pixel phones are a couple percent, but they're growing. But most of the world knows that this is how you get Android in your pocket. And so this is the conduit for distributing Google services throughout the world. Now, that's not to say there's no money exchanged. Of course there still is. Court documents always reveal the truth of what's happening, and sure enough, Google started paying Samsung, quote, enormous sums for Samsung to pre-install Gemini on the S25s, among other things. Money still talks. But yeah, all these things are worth keeping an eye on in 2025. Just some thoughts I had that I would share to sort of keep in the back of your head. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.